Gateway Biology, Community Level Systems, which is B4, and the second part of B4.1, Ecosystems. This week we are looking at interdependence. Now, in terms of what's on the syllabus, there's quite a lot of stuff here. So, number one, describe different levels of organisation in an ecosystem from individual organisms to the whole ecosystem. Now, we did touch on that a few weeks ago when we looked at things like community, niche, and so on. Explain how abiotic and biotic factors can affect communities. Again, we looked at that a few weeks ago. Describe the importance of interdependence and competition in a community. That's at least a point of one of today's sections. Describe the differences between trophic levels of organisms within an ecosystem. During the course of this lesson, you're going to find out what a trophic level is and the differences between them, quite obviously. Describe pyramids of biomass and explain with examples how biomass is lost between the different trophic levels. Yeah, we will get onto that later on. Calculate the efficiency of biomass transfers between trophic levels and explain how this affects the number of trophic levels in a food chain. Surprisingly easy is that. If you get an exam question on that, you'll be given the figures to work from. And basically, you need to be working out a percentage. And we'll talk about how that affects the number of trophic levels later on when we start talking about food chains and food webs. Right, onwards and downwards then. I'm going to show you this graph. This is one you've probably seen before, all over the place. Rabbits and foxes, populations of. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is put on a graph to show the population of rabbits. Now, that will be over 2 years. How do I know that? Quite simply. This is the start of 1 year. The population rises to a maximum. That'll be when there's the most food around. So we're probably talking kind of midsummer. And then as the food starts to run out, the population will start to drop and it'll reach bottom. And then somewhere around here, that is probably when spring starts again. Because you've got the last few rabbits dying off because there's still not enough food for them. And when the amount of food picks back up, you start to get the population rising again. And you hit another peak. So that, round about here, if you can see where my cursor is, will be round about the end of year 1. So that means the end of year 2 will be round about there. So we've got 2 and a bit years on that graph. Now that would be just average population based on, well, abiotic and biotic factors. So things like amount of food, amount of water, weather conditions, and so on. Now, one thing that also have an effect on it, since we're talking about interdependence today, is this. Predators. And if you look, they follow a very similar trajectory. So foxes move into the area, plenty of food, and an increasing amount of food, so their population increases. The population of their food starts to go down, so theirs starts to go down. But as you can see, there's a bit of a lag. What explains that lag? Well, there's going to be dead rabbits lying about, ones that have starved, which means there is still food available until all that runs out, and then the fox population ends up too high to be sustained and it'll start to drop again, and so on. Now explaining that could get you, 3 or 4 marks quite easily in an exam, just really saying what I just did. So graph reading is a very important skill. And what could be the cause of these changes in population? Well, just talked our way through that. So it could be climate, could be amount of water available, could be amount of food available, could be disease. That's where you start listing your biotic and abiotic factors, and you put in a line of explanation with each one. And that's how you get the full marks on that sort of thing. Dead simple question for you. What do organisms need to survive? Quite simply, what they need is food. They need water. Every living thing on this planet needs water. Full stop. Oxygen? Not necessarily. There are some organisms that are what's called obligate anaerobes, which means oxygen will actually kill them. It's poisonous to them. But then you're only talking like a fairly small number of microorganisms. And if you want survival of the species, you need breeding partners. Because, you may be able to reproduce asexually, but the problem is lack of variation. That'll cause problems later on. And we'll talk about that when we start looking at genetics. Territory is another thing. And that's not just animals either. Plants need territory as well. They need space. And in that space, they need all the other things that they need to survive. So food, water, oxygen, etc. Predator or prey. Very simple game. I show you a picture. You tell me whether that's a predator or prey. Yeah? So here's one for starters. It's prey. That one, predator. That one, predator. And that, of course, is a prey animal. And what about this one? If you don't know, that is a mongoose. But if you want to figure out whether it's predator or prey, have a look at its features. It's got claws. Yeah, you say, but rabbits have claws and they're prey animals. Yeah, fair enough. But look at where their eyes are. Eyes in the front of the head. That's a big indicator. Eyes in the front of the head means you have binocular vision. But having binocular vision means that you can judge distances. You look at the average herbivore, so prey animal, the eyes are on the side of the head, so they can see behind them, so they know when to run. That animal, that mongoose, its eyes are in the front of its head. Therefore, it's more than likely a predator. And it is, because they eat snakes. Common features. That's something I've literally just mentioned. So sharp teeth or beaks. Sharp claws. Usually curled or curved to give grip, rather than, if you look at a digging animal, their claws tend to be straight. Well, they're usually for digging. Whereas you look at predators, their claws are curved. If you've got a cat, for instance, have a look at their claws. Same with birds of prey. Good eyesight. Most predatory animals have got excellent eyesight. One of the best examples of this is definitely birds of prey, because they've got a specialized lens that has an extra focal point in it. It effectively gives them almost picture-in-picture views of what's going on. So they can be looking ahead and see what's ahead of them while they're flying, and they can also get a magnified, almost telescopic view of what's going on the ground. Generally, good sense. I mean, you look at, for example, the bloodhound. Bloodhounds have got, I mean, if you spread out all the sensory nerve endings in the nose of a bloodhound, it would cover about 1.5 sheets of A4. Compare that to a human, their sensory nerve endings in their nose, our sensory nerve endings cover about the size of a postage stamp. So a bloodhound is magnitudes more sensitive than we are to the sense of smell. Look at cats, look at their eyes. Their iris opens all the way up. That slit formation they have means that they can let a lot more light into their eye, so more light hits the retina. And they've also got a reflective layer on the back of the retina. So any light that passes through without being absorbed by the retinal cells gets reflected back onto them. So they've got basically built-in light intensifiers. So yeah, excellent sensors is definitely a thing if you are a predator. They also tend to be more intelligent. Very useful when you are stalking prey. And the reason for the higher intelligence is protein, the amount of protein in their diet. And we can see that from human evolution. Our ancestors, our herbivorous ancestors, had smaller brains, smaller skulls than the ones that ate meat later on. So our ancestors that started eating meat, over a few generations, their skulls became a lot bigger. And the fastest animals on the planet are all predators. The cheetah, for instance. 60 miles an hour, up to maybe 70. The bluefin tuna, or, well, sailfish as well, they are capable of about 30 miles an hour in the water. And there's nothing much goes faster than that because of fluid dynamics. Anybody who says anything more than that hasn't actually measured it. And peregrine falcons, over 120 miles an hour in a dive. Another useful thing, camouflage, especially if they are ambush predators. Cats especially. And in terms of prey animals, they do have some of the same kind of features, like camouflage, for instance, and sharp senses. But whereas a predator might have more of a focus on eyesight, a prey animal will probably have more of a focus on hearing and sense of smell, so they can detect danger. There we go, good hearing. Something that's mentioned before about the position of the eyes. If you put the eyes on the sides of the head, they can see behind them. And most prey animals have got exactly that. Good sense of smell, already mentioned. Speed and strength, so they can either escape or fight them off. Camouflage, especially actually in young animals. The young animals have got usually much better camouflage than the adults because they're more vulnerable. And there's another one. They tend to live in herds, or at least family groups, and they tend to protect each other. Whereas predators, a lot more of those tend to be solo hunters. I mean, you look at most cats. Most cats are ambush predators, and they are solo. Polar bears, again, solo. One of the few types of cat that actually lives in groups is lions. And that's more than likely because of the size of the prey they have to bring down. Even then, they don't really work very well as a team. Now then, all right, another little game. Herbivore, carnivore, or omnivore? Now, just to make sure we're all on the same page, a herbivore is an animal that eats plants and only eats plants. A carnivore is an animal that only eats other animals. And omnivores are animals that will eat either. Here we go then. It's a zebra. So it is a herbivore. Obviously, that's a lion. And it is a carnivore. That is a falcon. And it is a carnivore. That's a bear. And it is an omnivore. That's a hare. It's a herbivore. So just to run through it again, a carnivore is an animal that only eats other animals. A herbivore is an animal that only eats plants. And an omnivore eats both. And a little bit of a thing for you. Can you think of an example of each? Don't cheat by winding back the PowerPoint. Right, something else for you. Now, this requires a little bit of research on your part, because what you've got to do, and I would suggest that you pause the video, go do some research, and come back. Because I'm asking you, what's a parasite, what's a commensal, and what's a symbiote? Right, pause the video now. Oh, you just got me having a drink of tea there. Right, okay, so a parasite is an organism that benefits from another organism, its host organism, and causes it harm. So you'll be looking at something like a tapeworm, for instance, or a virus. So it lives off a host and it causes them harm. A commensal lives on its host but doesn't cause it any harm. Then again, it doesn't give it any benefits either. So skin bacteria, no real benefit to those, but they've got somewhere to live. Now, the symbiotes are probably the most interesting, because symbiotes live on a host and give it some kind of benefit. They both benefit from the relationship. And a good example of this would be a sea anemone and a hermit crab, because you do sometimes see this, a sea anemone attached to the shell that a hermit crab is living in. Now, what the hermit crab gets is an extra layer of protection, because the hermit crab is sort of going to be quite vulnerable. That's why it wears the abandoned shell of another animal. That sea anemone living on the shell provides, well, it's stinging tentacles, so it's protection, and any food that the anemone doesn't eat, the crab can. Now, the anemone gets the advantage of being able to move. Normally, they're stuck to rocks, and if they do move, they don't move very far. So they can move from one place to another, and it's a good way of getting food. Because if the crab catches something, anything that's left could end up floating into the anemone. So they both get something out of the relationship. Another one would be pilot fish. They have a symbiotic relationship with sharks. They provide the shark with protection, so from parasites, etc., by digging them out of their skin and even cleaning their teeth. And the pilot and the shark itself provides protection for the pilot fish, because nothing's going to try and eat the pilot fish when they are swimming next to an apex predator. And plus, any food the shark doesn't eat will probably float their way, so they get fed. So can you give examples of each organism? Yes, and we just have done. And besides feeding, how else might organisms depend on one another? Protection, for the most part.